Piper Archer 2, Emergency Procedures.
Engine fire during start.
Starter, crank engine. Mixture, idle, cutoff. Throttle, open. Electric fuel pump, off. Fuel selector, off. Abandon if fire continues.
Engine power loss during takeoff.
If sufficient runway remains for a normal landing, land straight ahead. If insufficient runway remains, maintain safe airspeed. Make only shallow turn to avoid obstructions. Flaps as situation requires. If sufficient altitude has been gained to attempt a restart, maintain safe airspeed. Fuel selector, switch to tank containing fuel. Electric fuel pump, check, on. Mixture, check rich. Carburetor heat, on. Primer, locked. If power is not regained, proceed with power off landing.
Engine power loss in flight.
Fuel selector, switch to tank containing fuel. Electric fuel pump, on. Mixture, rich. Carburetor heat, on. Primer, check, locked. If no fuel pressure is indicated, check tank selector position to be sure it is on a tank containing fuel. When power is restored, carburetor heat, off. Electric fuel pump, off. If power is not restored, prepare for power off landing. Trim for 76 knots of indicated airspeed.
Power off landing.
Locate suitable field. Establish spiral pattern 1,000 feet above field at downward position for normal landing approach. When field can easily be reached, slow to 66 knots of indicated airspeed for shortest landing. Touchdowns should normally be made at lowest possible airspeed with full flaps. When committed to landing, ignition, off. Master switch, off. Fuel selector, off. Mixture, idle, cutoff. Seatbelt and harness, tight.
Fire in flight.
Source of fire, check. If electrical fire, smoke in cabin. Master switch, off. Vents, open. Cabin heat, off. Land as soon as practicable. Engine fire. Fuel selector, off. Throttle, closed. Mixture, idle, cutoff. Electric fuel pump, check, off. Heater and
defroster,
off. Proceed with power off landing procedure.
Loss of oil pressure.
Land as soon as possible and investigate cause. Prepare for power off landing.
Loss of fuel pressure.
Electric fuel pump, on. Fuel selector, check on full tank.
High oil temperature.
Land at nearest airport and investigate the problem. Prepare for power off landing.
Alternator failure.
Verify failure. Reduce electrical load as much as possible. Alternator circuit breakers, check. Alternator switch, off for 1 second, then on. If no output, Alt switched off. Reduce electrical load and land as soon as practical.
Spin recovery.
Throttle, idle. Ailerons neutral. Rudder, full opposite to direction of rotation. Control wheel, full forward. Rudder, neutral when rotation stops. Control wheel, as required to smoothly regain level flight altitude.
Open door.
If both upper and side latches are open, the door will trail slightly open, and airspeeds will be reduced slightly. To close the door in flight, slow airplay to 87 knots of indicated airspeed. Cabin vents, close. Storm window, open. If upper latch is open, latch. If side latch is open, pull on armrest while moving latch handle to latch position. If both latches are open, latch, side latch, then top latch.
Carburetor icing.
Carburetor heat, on. Mixture, adjust for max smoothness.
Engine roughness.
Carburetor heat, on. If roughness continues after 1 minute, carburetor heat, off. Mixture, adjust for max smoothness. Electric fuel pump, on. Fuel selector, switch tanks. Engine gauges, check. Magneto switch, left, then right, then both. If operation is satisfactory on either one, continue on that magneto at reduced power and full rich mixture to first airport. Prepare for power off landing.
Amplified emergency procedures, general.
The following paragraphs are presented to supply additional information for the purpose of providing the pilot with a more complete understanding of the recommended course of action and probable cause of an emergency situation.
Engine fire during start.
Engine fires during start are usually the result of overpriming. The first attempt to extinguish the fire is to try to start the engine and draw the excess fuel back into the induction system. If a fire is present before the engine has started, move the mixture control to idle cutoff, open the throttle, and crank the engine. This is an attempt to draw the fire back into the engine. If the engine has started, continue operating to try to pull the fire into the engine. In either case above, if fire continues more than a few seconds, the fire should be extinguished by the best available external means. The fuel selector valve should be off and the mixture at idle cutoff if an external fire extinguishing method is to be used.
Engine power loss during takeoff.
The proper action to be taken if loss of power occurs during takeoff will depend on the circumstances of the particular situation. If sufficient runway remains to complete a normal landing, land straight ahead. If insufficient runway remains, maintain a safe airspeed and make only a shallow turn if necessary to avoid obstructions. Use of flaps depends on the circumstances. Normally, flaps should be fully extended for touchdown. If sufficient altitude has been gained to attempt a restart, maintain a safe airspeed and switch the fuel selector to another tank containing fuel. Check the electric fuel pump to ensure that it is on and that the mixture is rich. The carburetor heat should be on and the primer checked to ensure that it is locked. If engine failure was caused by fuel exhaustion, power will not be regained after switching fuel tanks until the empty fuel lines are filled. This may require up to 10 seconds. If power is not regained, proceed with the power-off landing procedure.
Engine power loss in flight.
Complete engine power loss is usually caused by fuel flow interruption, and power will be restored shortly after fuel flow is restored. If power loss occurs at a low altitude, the first step is to prepare for an emergency landing. An airspeed of at least 76 knots of indicated airspeed should be maintained. If altitude permits, switch the fuel selector to another tank containing fuel and turn the electric fuel pump on. Move the mixture control to rich and the carburetor heat to on. Check the engine gauges for an indication of the cause of the power loss. Check to ensure the primer is locked. If no fuel pressure is indicated, check the tank selector position to be sure it is on a tank containing fuel. When power is restored, move the carburetor heat to the off position and turn off the electric fuel pump. If the preceding steps do not restore power, prepare for an emergency landing.